33 minutes after 12, you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I am delighted to tell you I've got that very rare experience. I have a guest in the studio, Richard O'Brien, who you will know, of course, from the Rocky Horror Show and I suppose the Crystal Maze if you're close to my age. But I know for a whole heap of reasons. When I was a very young and callow show business journalist, I was sent an album by the bloke off the Rocky Horror Show. And I thought it was a quite beautiful album. I thought that, of course, we should have realised there is a talent here way beyond your most famous achievements. And I've always had a soft spot for you ever since.
I'm delighted, James, to be here. It's like a gathering of the Clan O'Brien, isn't it?
That has been commented upon. Is that the only qualification to get involved?
It's a great pleasure. I can't remember the last time we saw it. It's got to be at least 10 years since we stumbled across each other.
The first time I met you was in a fashionable West London watering hole where, somewhat annoyingly, every man in there apart from me had a bald head and a black polo neck on. So I spent about 20 minutes trying to find you, wandering around. I said hello to two people before I got the right view.
Well, actually, when I first shaved my head back in the 70s, people used to cross the street to avoid me.
It sent out a rather different message.
It was confrontational, almost.
Yes.
People, and I remember I went to a Jewish wedding with a shaved head, and all the old ladies were shrinking back in their chairs until I took the sandwiches around, and then they sort of warmed slightly to me. But it was a very strange thing, and elderly people would discuss me between themselves.
As if you weren't there.
As if I wasn't there, nudge and point, and I go, I've just got shaved my head and my hair off. What's the problem? And now, of course, everybody does, because it's actually it's better than having a comb over, isn't it?
Yeah, all right. So I haven't quite reached that Rubicon yet. I may still be going to a mild comb over. I'm still fighting shy of the full shave. But I mean, we should talk about why you're back in Britain, because it's not home anymore for you.
No, I live in New Zealand now. I was brought up in New Zealand. My parents emigrated there in 1952. I went through pubescence and adolescence there, and came back to Great Britain for a year's working holiday in 1964. And it took me 50 years to get back home again.
What happened in 1964? What were you drawn into? What was the magic that...
64?
Yes.
I was lost. I had no idea, no direction. I didn't want to carry on doing what I was doing. I was cutting hair, and I didn't want to do that anymore. I was getting exceptionally good money for it at the time.
Were you very good at it?
I was okay. Yeah, I was good at it. Yeah, but I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to stand on my feet behind a chair anymore all day, and I wanted to broaden my horizons, and so I got on a boat and came to Great Britain. And I got a job a year later. I got a job riding horses in the movies, and that was rather nice.
How did you get a job riding horses in the movies?
Well, it was an advert in a newspaper called The Stage saying, can you ride horses? We're looking for people to ride horses in films. And a new agency was set up. The Howard Evans Powell Agency had an office in somewhere down in Victoria somewhere. And I went along and auditioned on a horse and ride slip somewhere on a paddock, and it was bareback, big fat mare. You could hardly get your knees in to hold on.
For anyone just tuning in, Richard O'Brien is talking about horses.
Yeah. Yes. Anyway, that's how I got into my start in showbiz, on riding horses in movies.
When did you realise it was something you loved? When was something that you loved, as opposed to when you were astride the big fat mare, or was it a little later, a little further down the path?
I guess I knew I always wanted to be in the world of make-believe, dressing up and making believe, truthfully. I think from way back in my childhood, I always found that attractive, pretending you're somebody else, and going to the movies and seeing the actors on the screen, you think, I wish I was doing that. I think a lot of us have that kind of that drive and that need when we're young, but as we get a little older, we're conditioned not to follow those kinds of dreams. We're conditioned to go and get a proper job and start to become realistic about the world. And actually, it's a shame, that, isn't it? Really,
it's probably harder now to follow a dream like that than it was in 1964.
Much more difficult. Weekly Rep has disappeared. The making of drama on television has disappeared. The outlets. In fact, until very recently, Panto was the world of say, light entertainers could get a proper job in the theatre. And now pantos, you've got people like Ian McKellen and
Yes, it's
Simon Callow and people doing panto. And you go, back then they wouldn't have done it 10 years ago. They wouldn't have touched it with a barge pole. But now, you see, there's so little work around, and it pays exceptionally well, pantomime. Exceptionally well. You don't want to know what they would get per week? Ian McKellen would get a week doing panto?
Ballpark, go on.
Oh, let's say £30,000 a week.
Because the tickets shift on such a grand scale, the theatres are full.
Huge.
And the names are the draw.
Yeah.
You did it though.
I did do it. I saved my bacon. I didn't know the tax man was coming.
Was it a tax
so virulently?
Widow tax bill.
If I hadn't done the panto, I'd had to have sold the house.
Well, which will surprise people, Richard, because the Rocky Horror Show is never off stage, is it? Since pretty much the day you wrote it, and the idea that you should really be immune from problems like tax bills suggests that you perhaps were a little bit better at writing musicals than you were at reading contracts.
I think that's possibly true. I think also, of course, everybody thinks if you earn a lot of money, then you must get rich. But of course, the more money you earn, the more tax you pay, and all those kinds of outputs. And divorce doesn't come cheaply. All kinds of things come into your life, and you're living quite well. I mean, I don't live an extraordinary life of extremes of spending. I'm quite conservative when it comes to spending money, but. I'm so grateful to have a roof over my head. I'm so grateful that fresh water comes through the tap. I'm so grateful I got food in the fridge and clean linen on the bed. And that's the most important thing in my life. And having love in my life is essential. And the rest of it is immaterial, really.
Except for perhaps the people who enjoy the work that you do. They wouldn't consider it immaterial. And the passion, the affection with which your work is held is pretty close to unique. I know that's an overused word, but I can't think of another production, another stage show that has enjoyed not just the quantity of admiration, but the quality of admiration.
And the roar of approval.
The roar of approval.
It's astonishing. I just stand on the stage and hear that roar.
Because that's what you've been doing.
Of approval. Is just so wonderful. And there have been occasions in the past where a cast has been put together, and they've said to themselves, you can see it, they don't have to say it out loud, you can see it, they go, yes, okay, it is a 40-year-old musical, and I could be doing the Three Sisters, or, the Seagull, or something, a bit more kind of Medea, or something more, that would give a bit more...
highbrow.
Yes. But after about a couple of days on the stage with an audience in, you can feel the dynamic change in them, because they're never going to get that roar of approval when they come in for the curtain call doing the Seagull. You know what I mean? It is such a inspiring kind of. It just lifts you. It's so wonderful.
Where are we now with the new production then? Well, what is the state of play?
We've got another week to do at the Playhouse here, and we close on Saturday, and then at Christmas time we're going to move the production to Brighton as an alternative panto for Brighton, and then next year it'll be a national tour, British national tour. And
as I've mentioned a couple of times, people will already be getting excited about that. Did it ever freak you out a bit? Did you ever sort of, because it is something, I mean, when did you write it? What year did
1973.
1973, and as I mentioned at the outset, I was taken aback by the sheer beauty of your. It was just a simple album, wasn't it? Of you and your piano.
It wasn't intended to be a jazz-oriented album, but that's what it finally turned out to be. Afterwards, things happened in the studio that changed things. We had a heat wave, and we were supposed to go in and out in about 10 days, maybe less, and because we had all the songs, we had the musicians, and we just needed a producer. Pick Williams produced it for us, and we just thought we'd be in and out really quickly, and that didn't happen. and we took about 2 months to make the album, and what was supposed to be an album cheaply made and quickly made turned into a quite expensively made album, and lots of guest musicians came along, which was delightful, and it slowly slipped away from a kind of raw, kind of rock and roll driven album into something slightly more sophisticated and jazz driven.
And I loved it. I really did. And yet I remember asking you at the time whether or not, because 1973, to be still best known for something that is nearly 50 years old.
Yeah.
Were there ever any moments where you sort of wished that other projects had assumed a similar?
Not really. I've never been ambitious.
So how did this happen then?
Honestly,
how did
haven't been
Rocky
ambitious.
Tell people how Rocky Horror happened then. How can an unambitious man end up writing such a groundbreaking?
I was doing a play at the Royal Court Theatre called the Unseen Hand, which is a Sam Shepard play, and the director of that, Jim Sharman, had directed Superstar, and he put me into the Unseen Hand, and there I met a man called Richard Hartley, who's become my writing companion for the last 40-odd years. And while I was doing the Unseen Hand, I mentioned to both Jim and Richard that I was dabbling with this idea of a musical. I didn't really have a title for it then. I was calling it They Came From Denton High. And
that's quite good.
It was a little, I like the little kind of, anyway. They came round to my house. I played them science fiction double feature, and I think...
Had you always written stuff? Had you?
I loved writing songs. That's my favourite.
Even back in New Zealand?
Yes. That's my favourite choice of work, actually, sitting, because nobody's looking over your shoulder.
Which is strange. We're going to take some travel news, but when I come back, I'm going to ask a question that is going to loosely knit together those two strands. I'll work out what the question is during the travel news.
Ooh.
But how can someone who is fondest of the contemplative, introspective art of songwriting end up being such an extrovert performer on stage? Don't answer it yet, because I haven't thought of the question properly yet. Yeah. I just need to...
I didn't know that I was extrovert.
Well, you must be a bit extrovert. But don't spoil it. Let's keep it fresh. It's 12:45. Saturday then could be the very last time you put on the grease paint, pull on the stockings.
Yes, that's possibly so. Yes, I think so. I'm doing a little work in New Zealand. I'm working on a television program there, which tests people's DNA, and then we follow the links, the ethnic links and the chain of their ancestry back, which is quite fascinating, discovering people have different ethnicities that they had never dreamt of before, right back to the cradle of mankind and to Africa. I, for instance, have had my DNA tested, and I discovered that I have a 2.06% of Neanderthal man inside of me. So Neanderthal man didn't completely die out. He hitchhiked a ride with Homo sapien. This is kind of interesting, isn't it?
It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Which 2.06% of you is it, do you think? That is
where is it? I don't know. I don't know.
Where does it make itself most apparent?
It's the round shoulders and the long arms. The knuckles scraping the ground.
It could be. You mentioned a moment just while we were off air that when they do the cinema screenings of something that's happening on stage. You did one with Rocky Horror last week.
We did last Thursday. We streamed the show around cinemas in Great Britain and Europe, up to Denmark, Germany, and Finland, and other places around, and France, and all over Great Britain. We broke the box office records, which was delightful. We apparently took over £600,000 at the cinemas in Great Britain alone. So that was quite exciting, and that was for Amnesty International as well. It was a fundraiser for Amnesty, so it was all good news.
It is. You when it hits the road in December, Brighton in December, and then on to Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, Empire, Cardiff. The website is unsurprisingly up and running now. You won't be in the production then.
No, we'll find somebody else to be playing.
Any idea who?
Huh?
Any idea who? Is it?
I'm not at the moment. I don't actually. I don't envy him particularly, because you do have to deal with people shouting out lines, which is a bit difficult from time to time, and you have to remain cheerful.
And the punters think they own it, don't they?
To some degree, they do. I think. In fact, one American once said to me, "Oh, Mr. O'Brien, you don't really own Rocky anymore. It belongs to the fans." You go, yes, okay.
So on one level, you might say that. Yes. Why? I know you've answered this question a billion times, but people would expect me to ask it of you. Why do you think it has achieved such an astonishing... The producer's going tomorrow night, and I've never seen him so excited. He's like a dog with a bone, and he wasn't born when you wrote it.
Well, I think it's one of the reasons for its longevity is that it's a fairy tale, and so therefore it pleases on a very wonderfully childish kind of subliminal level somehow or other. It's Babes in the Wood, isn't it, really? Hansel and Gretel.
Yes.
And I think that's part of it. The other reasons are that it makes you laugh, and it's in the same way that the Carry On film did. It's smutty in that kind of way, but not rude, but just kind of silly and naughty. And the rock and roll songs are rock and roll songs. They're not songs from a musical. They're not sung in a musical way. They stand on their own in a way that no other show does. Even Grease, you see, is pastiche. It's a pretend. It's looking back and writing songs in the style of the 50s, whereas Rocky didn't do that. It wrote the songs as if they were real songs for the time being, and not looking backward, simply because I came out of the 50s. So I came out of that tradition. That's when I first started writing songs, was back then. Songs had that rock and roll shape, 3 verses and a middle 8, basically.
And I don't know if this is true for you, but it is for me. People who can't sing can sing along. People who ordinarily would never raise their voice in public can sing their little...
Yes, and it has the same appeal that karaoke has, doesn't it?
I didn't mean it like that. Because no, actually, karaoke, if you can't sing, you make a fool of yourself at karaoke. You'll have to take my word for this, because you obviously can sing. But Rocky Horror, you can really get stuck in and kid yourself that you're actually adding to the overall impression rather than ruining it for everybody who can actually hold a tune.
I'll go back to karaoke, because I went to karaoke twice actually, and when sat there and people got up and couldn't sing, and I started to complain. And on both occasions, 2 different people said, "Oh, Richard, for God's sakes, that's why they're here."
Oh, I see. Yeah.
You see, and I went, "Oh, you're absolutely right," because they couldn't do it anywhere else. They wouldn't be allowed to do it anywhere else.
Carry on and be awful.
And so it's a bit like that. People singing along with Rocky. Luckily, we've got enough people with strong voices to hold the music true and the notes true, and it doesn't really matter if someone's slightly off key out in the audience. It just adds another frisson of joy.
Have you ever seen a production you hated of your own shows?
The one?
Have you ever seen a production that you hated, that you didn't like?
Yes. And I sat there with a friend and got to the end, and the audience started to roar with their approval again. And I turned to the friend and I said, "It's foolproof, isn't it?"
That's a pretty good line. I mean, I don't want you to tempt fate, but the cast you've got for the show currently at the Playhouse and then hitting the road in December is pretty special.
It's exceptionally strong. Exceptionally strong, and of course, over the 40 years, the production values have increased simply because the technology has improved so dramatically. Lighting now, compared to 40 years ago, is just stupendous. Sound in 40 years is stupendous. We had to put up with lots of tweaking and pushing things to get the best out of it all the way back then, and now we've got solid state and wonderful sound production. It's like a wonderful. I was sitting out the front. I watched it a bit the other day. I'm sitting out the front. The lighting is just astonishing. It's just wonderfully lit. So all those production values have increased. It's a really tight show, which I like very much. It seems to me it races through, but it's people pick up the cues and it moves on. It doesn't
slick,
drag
at
all.
No, I mean, if you want to go and see it, you should. rockyhorror.co.uk. You can find there's a few shows left this week, but then of course the tour commences come December. A lot of people have asked me to ask you about the Crystal Maze as well, Richard, because there was some reports recently that it was coming back as a sort of immersive, interactive experience. Have you heard anything about this?
They tell me it's going to be a bit like a theme park.
Yes,
and they would like me to get on and talk to journalists about it, but I can't do that until I'm absolutely assured that it's going to be a first-class kind of ticket for everybody. I hope that it will be, and if it is, I shall be there as virtual Rick of the Crystal Maze, up on a screen somewhere welcoming people.
What were you thinking of when you were doing? Because that was, for me, that was a seminal television performance. I'd never seen anything like it, and on almost every level, it challenged gender politics, it challenged everything. Did you realise when you were doing it?
I loved it. And
I bet you did.
One of the nicest things about that show, one of the loveliest things about that was a long, long day. The crew would get there about 6:30, start setting up and all the rest of it. The players would get along there about 8 o'clock. I'd come on set about 8:30, 9 o'clock, and we would work till about 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, freezing cold, but not a single negative soul anywhere near the building.
Maybe that's why.
And that was delightful.
You could tell, and I think that probably describes you to a T. Not a single negative impulse or thought. The work.
Stop it.
So, thank you very much. No, I'm not hitting on you. Not at this point in proceedings. Rocky Horror Show, as I say, is on in London until Saturday, but after that, it's hitting the road come December. Go to rockyhorror.co.uk. Richard O'Brien, it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, James.
We're not related, are we?
No. Well, my grandfather had a bike and got around a bit.
It's 12:59. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.